Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Hay Group's webinar on sustained learning and the educator's bottom line. My name is Polly Flink, and I am part of Hay Group's team in Boston. Also with me this afternoon is Ginny Flynn from our Boston office and Vanessa Druskett, who is an associate professor at the University of New Hampshire. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. Our webinar today is scheduled for 1 hour and is in listen-only mode. We encourage you to send any questions you may have through the chat feature at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. I will be reading your questions at the end of the presentation, so they may be answered. Throughout the presentation, there will be a series of live polling questions that we'll be asking to keep the presentation interactive and to better steer the discussion. We will give you a few seconds to answer, and the results will be displayed automatically. Today's webinar will explore experiential learning theory and emotional intelligence. We will start with an overview of our partnerships before diving into a closer look at learning styles and our tools associated with this theory. Next, we'll spend some time on emotional intelligence and continue on to the topic of developing EI in students. Towards the end of this webinar, we'll have a quick look at our survey options and pricing, and finally we'll finish with a Q&A period to field any questions you may have. I would like to introduce my colleague, Ginny Flynn, who will be taking over from here. Ginny has been with the Hay Group for almost 17 years. Her responsibilities include managing the talent team in Boston, overseeing accreditations for the United States, and managing the ongoing account management and delivery of Hay Group's talent solutions. So with that, I will hand this over to you, Ginny.
Thank you, Polly. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm so pleased to be here today to talk with you about the research-based, practical, impactful, and affordable tools that Hay Group is proud to offer educators. As Polly mentions, I've been with Hay Group for 17 years. During those years, I have had the distinct pleasure of working with colleagues both within Hay Group and beyond who are thought leaders in their respective fields, including the gentleman you see listed here. David Kolb, developer of the Learning Style Inventory, founder of Experience-Based Learning Systems, and professor of Organizational Behavior at Case Western Reserve University. Richard Boyatzis, professor of Organizational Behavior at Case Western as well, and author of books such as The Competent Manager and Resonant Leadership, and Daniel Goleman, best-selling author and co-founder of the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations. Richard Boyatzis and Daniel Goleman, in addition, are co-developers with Hay Group of the Emotional and Social Competency Inventory University Edition. In addition, in another life, as an adjunct faculty member, I've used these tools that we'll talk about today within an MBA program. So, before we dive in, we have one of those polling questions that Polly mentioned earlier, and what we'd like to do is get a sense of how familiar you are with experiential learning. So if you take a moment to choose whether you are very, somewhat, or not familiar with experiential learning, that would be helpful. Okay, and the majority of you are at least somewhat familiar. And then some of you very familiar. So I hope, and I'm pretty certain, that we're going to be able to build on that familiarity and provide you with some additional useful information in regards to experiential learning and the products that we do offer around that. Okay. So experiential learning, as most of you know, basically puts experience at the center of the learning process. And it draws on the theories and works of a number of people, including John Dewey, William James, Kurt Lewin, and Jean Piaget. James' radical empiricism specifically tells us that all knowledge begins and ends in our subjective experience. And the beauty of this approach is basically that the learner is in control. If the learner is aware of his or her preferences and their associated strengths and weaknesses, then he or she is capable of developing a more effective approach to learning. Let's face it, we are not always allowed to choose the way new information is presented or provided to us. So ultimately, being able to learn in a variety of ways is the goal. For teachers, understanding your own learning preferences and the impact those have on your teaching style is essential. Being able to flex and incorporate something for everyone in the classroom is really important. And gently or not so gently, if need be, pushing students out of their comfort zones is critical, because the goal, after all, is developing well-rounded learners. David Kolb's cycle of learning, as seen here, identifies the various stages or phases associated with learning. And ideally, we cycle through and spend time in each of these phases to truly have the most effective learning experience. That's not always the case. Some of us have very strong preferences for certain stages and maybe just as strongly avoid other stages. But again, ideally, if we cycle through and spend time in each of these stages as appropriate, we learn best. I always use the example of riding a bike. And because I have such a strong preference for the concrete experience stage of the cycle, which is seen here at the top, that's likely where I would enter this learning cycle. And I would hop right on that bike and probably just as quickly fall off, not having a clue how to keep it from wobbling and falling right over. My next stop, if you will, would be in the reflective observation stage here to the right. And it's there that I would take a moment to sit down and reflect on what went wrong. If I was lucky at this point, someone might even be riding by, providing me with a chance to observe what he was doing that I was not. I would then be able to head down to the abstract conceptualization phase and, based on my reflections and observations, come to some conclusions about what I could do differently to ensure a more successful ride. I then continue on up to the active experimentation phase and take those conclusions, put them into action, get on the bike, and try that new approach. So why did Dave Kolb develop the LSI? Well, he often talks about the dissatisfaction that he felt back in, the 70s, with the traditional teaching methods he was using within his own classroom. And he noticed a difference between his own interests in basic theory and his students' interest in more practical applications. So he decided he was going to mix things up. He was going to introduce games, exercises, simulations, case studies, what have you, again, speaking to his students' interest in more practical learning, and see what happened. And he was actually surprised to find that when he changed his approach, there were some students who were actually more dissatisfied by this approach from his previous approach, simply because they had preferences for the way he had been teaching previously. But it gave him a new appreciation for all of the different styles associated with those students in his classroom and the need to teach to each of those styles. I myself have used the Learning Style Inventory within a management communications course and would start each term, actually, with the Learning Style Inventory as basically one of the first exercises. And I would ask the students to, after they had completed the assessment, identified their own learning style, read about the other styles as well, got a better feel for what those styles looked like. I'd ask them to think about someone at work with whom they were having some type of challenge or issue communicating. And I'd ask them to identify, based on what they knew now about the learning styles, what that particular person's learning style was. And based on knowing that style and what that style preferred, what the strengths and weaknesses associated with that style were, I would ask them to approach that person differently. What could they do to communicate with that person differently to have a more successful outcome? And I would ask them to actually try out that new approach, and then report back to the class in regards to the results. And a lot of the examples that the students brought back to the class had to do with basically department or functional differences. So, for instance, the marketing rep who was completely frustrated by the tons of information that the accounting rep would throw at her, when all she really wanted was some high-level, wow factor, bullet point type items. So in hearing that was one of many examples, and most of the students would come back with an aha moment that said, you're right. When I was able to appreciate how that person preferred to receive information and I was able to present it to them in that way, I had a more successful outcome. Talk about some of the other applications associated with the learning style inventory. We've talked about this one in terms of communication at work, but it also has implications for how students and others solve problems or make decisions, how they manage conflict, how they perform as part of a team, and in some cases, what it might mean for them in regards to career choices, and we'll touch on that a little later as well. So David developed the Learning Style Inventory, which was later called, actually renamed the Kolb Learning Style Inventory specifically because there were so many subsequent tests, questionnaires, products that came out on the market by that name. But when he first developed one of his first versions, there have been many versions over the years, and we have been distributing the tool for him since the 80s. The most recent version seen here is the 3.1. And in this version and prior versions, 4 styles were identified. And those 4 styles are seen here: accommodating, diverging, converging, and assimilating. And those styles, basically, you'll see here as well that the cycle of learning that we talked about earlier is kind of superimposed here as well. There's the concrete experience phase at the top, followed by the reflecting observation phase to the right, the abstract conceptualization at the bottom, and the active experimentation to the left there. So experiencing, reflecting, thinking, and doing. In general, that x-axis is looking at how people, actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to start with the y-axis. The y-axis is looking at how we grasp or take in new information. Do we do that in a concrete, hands-on type way, or do we prefer to do that in an abstract, conceptual type way? While the x-axis is looking at how we transform that new learning that we are provided with. Do we prefer to immediately try it out for ourselves, or are we more comfortable taking a moment to reflect on that new piece of information? These 4 styles basically speak to the fact that the preference of how you take in new information and then what you do with that new information combine to identify which of these 4 quadrants you fall into. The gray cross that appears on this particular view of the Learning Style 3.1 speaks to the fact that even then, with this version, Dave and Alice Kolb were working toward a new version, the version 4, which we're going to see in just a moment. This gray area was highlighting for people that as they got closer to either of these axes, they were actually straddling, if you will, potentially styles, that the one style did not completely define them. In the Learning Style Inventory 4, basically 9 styles are identified. And again, it was building since the 3.1 with that cross-type area and ultimately identified these 9 distinct styles. And Dave and Alice Kolb's interest in creating and distributing this Learning Style Inventory 4 was basically in relation to their ongoing efforts to improve the inventory, specifically in regards to its reliability and validity. In addition, some of that interest was based on actual user feedback as well. We and they would receive comments from actual users who would express some concern or dissatisfaction with the 4 previous styles and the fact that that particular style did not necessarily fit them perfectly, that they actually felt that they could be, for instance, just as easily diverging as they were accommodating. So this 9-style approach really helped to specifically define those preferences more specifically. The other thing about the Learning Style Inventory version 4 is that beyond the actual styles, there is an additional flexibility measure that is assessed for. And for anyone who might have been familiar with the adaptive style inventory previously available, developed by David Kolb and Richard Boyatzis, it basically incorporates that previous assessment into this Learning Style Inventory version 4. So in addition to getting, in terms of output, the style name, the style preference that you've scored for, you also get a measure of how flexible or not you are in regards to your learning style. The score is provided in 2 ways. Basically, you get a score on a scale of 1 to 10, say. But you also get specific information in regards to how flexible you are and where you flex to, as seen on this screen. So while the green square identifies your overall learning preference as acting, these darker gray squares show that you specifically have the ability to easily flex toward the deciding, thinking, analyzing, and balancing styles as well. So we have another polling question for you, and this time the polling question is, do you think learning styles change? So take a moment and let us know, yes, no, not sure. Okay, the majority of you think yes, and you are right. If we had prizes to give, we would give them to you now. Absolutely. As our situations change, say we move from being a student to an employee, or we change jobs within an organization, or even move on to a new organization, absolutely, our situation's going to change. We will likely be put into situations in which we need to approach people or projects in a different way, and our ability to do so will be critical and speaks to this flexibility measure that's now incorporated into the LSI-4. So yes, in general, we would say that learning style is a state rather than a trait, and should your situation change, you absolutely want to be able to change your approach to learning. Okay, so within the Learning Style Inventory version 4, we've talked about the need for flexibility in addition to getting feedback on what your overall style is, where you are able to flex to. There's also information provided that is focused on helping you to make a learning plan and to set some learning goals. And basically, what's provided here on this slide refers to the specific questions that you can start asking yourself if you are looking to flex toward a style that is not necessarily a comfortable place for you or where you would go normally. So things like, for instance, if you are looking to flex toward an initiating style, think about what action you could take. How do you start? Where are the opportunities? Can I take a chance on this? These are things that someone who does not have that preference normally would think to ask or do for themselves. So these guidelines provide some help for the individual who is seeking to flex toward that particular style. We talked about career implications earlier in the presentation, and while there is no direct mapping per se in regards to learning styles and jobs or careers, there are preference patterns, if you will. So for instance, here on this slide we're looking at the accommodating style, basically, on the left here, someone who prefers to take in new information in a very concrete way and then try it out and be very active. So two preferences for action there in regards to learning, and the career characteristics associated with that, which shouldn't surprise you too much, are things like taking action, seeking out opportunities, making things happen, influencing others, leading, taking a leadership role. And these characteristics are typically, but absolutely not exclusively, associated with jobs found in management and human resources, sales and marketing, teaching. Likewise, over on the quadrant, which includes the concrete experience for taking in new information, but a reflective observation preference for what you do with it once you get it, the career characteristics there are being sensitive to different perspectives, communicating and building trust, helping others. And these characteristics specifically are, again, not exclusively, but can be found in service-oriented careers like arts and entertainment, communication, and social services. Through all of the characteristics associated with the others as well. But as you can see here, it follows through. Again, there are learning preferences that do tend to have implications for career choices as well. It's at this point that I'd like Vanessa to actually share with you some of her insights in regards to using the Learning Style Inventory. As Polly mentioned earlier, Vanessa is Associate Professor of Organizational Behavior and Management at the Whitmore School of Business and Economics at UNH, and she is, again, going to share some of her insights. So, Vanessa?
Thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you and talk to you about, right now, the Learning Style Inventory. This is something that I've been using for probably 10 years in my teaching. I teach primarily organizational behavior classes, and I teach them at the MBA and the undergraduate level. And like Ginny, I start off the very first class of the term with this inventory. I have students fill it out. It takes 10 or 15 minutes to fill out in class. And we look at the various learning preferences in the classroom. So one of the things I do is I take a roll of masking tape, and I lay it out on the floor in a plus sign, and I have all the assimilators go into one corner and stand in the corner relative to where they actually land on their scoring. And the divergers go in the other corner, assimilators and convergers, and we take a look at where everyone in the class has landed on the inventory. So it gives us a quick snapshot, and it gives us an opportunity to see, how many people are we going to have in the class that are going to prefer to learn through, say, abstract conceptualization, which is lecturing, and how many people in the class are going to prefer to learn through concrete experience, which is about listening to everyone talk about their experiences. And so then I talk about how difficult it is as a professor to try to meet everyone's needs in the class. But the other thing is I also use this a lot, or talk about it a lot, as a problem-solving inventory. So it really speaks to how these students like to solve problems. So learning really is a problem to be solved. So we also talk about how this will emerge in the teams that you're going to be placed in this course. So in a minute I'll tell you a little bit about how I use it in the actual teams. But one more thing about using it to frame how to best learn from experience. I actually use it also when I have them write papers. So I have all my students write a paper that's called a personal application exercise. And in that exercise, I have them start off with, it's a 4-part paper. They start off writing about an experience. I then ask them to reflect on on that experience a little bit. That's the second part. The third part, I have them pull in theory from the course. So, for example, I've got students writing about, say, a bad manager that they had. So I'll have them use, motivation theory or leadership theory to analyze that experience using this theory. And then in the active experimentation section of the paper, I'll have them talk about, well, what will they do when they're managers? So I basically have them walk around the whole learning style inventory as a way to help them begin to learn how to really learn from your experience well. So not just experience and hope you're going to learn from it, but experience and really carry it all the way around through the learning style inventory and apply theory to it and that kind of thing. Lastly, though, it's really useful for student teams. So it's a very simple model. You're in one of 4 quadrants, and I help them think about how they might have conflicts in their teams. We develop a language around this. We know that the convergers, the people who are on the southwest, are going to be people who want to get the project done really quickly. The divergers in the northeast are people who are going to want to keep talking and talking and talking and reflecting on what the problem's about. And so we talk about potential conflicts in the teams. And we create this language. So whenever they're having a problem in their team, I'll say, well, is this a problem that is emerging because you all have different problem-solving styles, and what might that mean? And ultimately, I tell them that the most effective way to solve the problem is to pull on all 4 styles. So if you happen not to have someone in your team that falls into one of the particular styles, then who's going to be the assimilator, who's going to be the converger if you don't have someone who has that style in your team? The other thing I've done is I've actually broken my students into teams using the learning style inventory. So they take it in the first day of class, and I'll have them hand in the inventory or tell me what their styles are, and I'll try to break all the teams up so that they have accommodators, one accommodator, one diverger, one assimilator, and one converger in each team, so that in some ways I'm kind of setting them up for having conflicts, just so that they can learn from the experience of dealing with people with other problem-solving styles, and that it works out well, creates some problems, but I actually think that they learn a lot from that stress and those problems. So that's about all I have to say. I'll be happy to entertain questions if you have any for me at the end of the webinar.
Thanks, Vanessa. I had to laugh when you were talking about the challenge for the professor. I remember doing a similar exercise, and almost everyone in a particular class that I was teaching fell into the assimilating quadrant. And I, on the other hand, am about as extreme as you can get in the accommodating quadrant, and I started to sweat a lot in terms of how I was going to actually be able to teach this group of students and do right by them. Suffice to say, it worked out okay. Everything went well, but yeah, I had a few sweaty, nervous type moments. Okay, we're going to move on to emotional intelligence, and we're going to start with a polling question there in regards to your familiarity with emotional intelligence. So please let us know whether you're very, somewhat, or not familiar with emotional intelligence. Okay, so just about everybody has at least some familiarity, and a good number of you are very familiar. So again, what we'll do then mostly is focus on the offering we have in that space. We'll start with the definition that we subscribe to, which is Daniel Goleman's, and it defines emotional intelligence as the capacity for recognizing our own feelings and those of others, for motivating ourselves, for managing emotions well in ourselves and in our relationships. We're often asked when we're speaking so passionately about emotional intelligence, don't we think that IQ or more traditional smarts as defined more traditionally matter? And we say absolutely these smarts do matter. However, that's what gets you in the door. It's the cost of entry. Our research shows that where you go from there, whether it's at school or at work, what have you, depends more on emotional and social intelligence competencies like the ones found in the model I will introduce shortly. When we ask clients to describe their star performers, they very rarely, if ever, mention how smart they are. They always talk about these star performers as people who can read and relate to all kinds of people, who set goals and seek to achieve and even exceed those goals, are able to make the best of even the worst situations, and people who can easily shift gears midstream if need be. All competencies, basically, that are worthy and I'd venture to say even essential to develop in students. A survey, actually, of Harvard graduates showed that their entrance results had a 0 or negative correlation with their subsequent career performance. So, again, this underscores what I had said earlier, that the IQ may be a prerequisite, but the emotional and social intelligence makes the difference thereafter. So we would say that EI will help your students basically become aware of their strengths and weaknesses in that regard, help them to focus their development on those competencies that will make a difference to their leadership capability, will help them to gain insight into the complexities of group behavior and teams that they're asked to be part of, and really will ultimately help them to understand how to plan and manage their personal development. So The tool specifically that we're talking about is the Emotional and Social Competency Inventory, University Edition specifically, which is a multi-rater assessment designed to help the students develop these critically important competencies. And the tool includes 5 emotional intelligence competencies, 7 social, and 2 cognitive intelligence competencies. And it's distinctive in that it's based on hundreds of competency studies conducted in organizations throughout the world. It's important actually to step back for a moment and say we've been talking about this as the University Edition. This is an edition specifically designed for use with students, but its predecessor is the original tool that was developed for use with leaders within organizations. The competencies that are assessed are the same, except for those 2 cognitive competencies that were included in this University Edition specifically because Richard Boyatzis felt that these were especially important for students. So the multi-rater approach basically gives the students an opportunity to see how they're perceived versus perhaps what they intend, because as we know, what we intend is not always how we come across. So getting that perspective, that feedback from others helps us to identify any differences between what we think we're doing versus how we're being perceived by others. This multi-rater feedback helps to inform the change that the students are then able to work on. But as most of you know, we need to step back a bit and look at ultimately for change to happen, there has to be some type of tension, some difference between who we are and who we want to be, and that's often referred to as cognitive dissonance. And so the multi-rater piece of it actually informs or provides a reality check for that who I am, and then makes the beginning of that change possible. The other piece, which Richard will always say is so critical in change with anyone, be it a student or a leader, is to engage the aspirations as well. So make sure that we understand, what the aspirations that the individual has, and be sure to engage those. And for any of you out there who have tried to quit smoking or lose weight, you know that it's critical for your success. Someone else telling you that you should lose weight or quit smoking really has very little impact. You have been, or I know I was, successful when I decided that that's truly what I aspired to be, a non-smoker, as opposed to someone just telling me I should quit because that was what was good for me. So engaging aspirations, providing students with a realistic view of who they currently are, and then helping them to realize what they want to be. Okay, the model itself is here. It is based on the model first provided by Daniel Goleman in his book Emotional Intelligence, and it's basically 4 things. It's self-awareness. How aware am I of what I am feeling and what my strengths and weaknesses are? Self-management. How capable am I of both managing my emotions and motivating myself? Social awareness. How capable am I of understanding the perspective and feelings of others? And relationship management. How capable am I of managing and motivating others? The self-awareness quadrant is basically the heart of EI. Our research has shown that it is virtually impossible for someone to self-manage if they are not self-aware. Basically, it's very difficult to manage your emotions if you do not even know that you're caught in the grip of some type of emotion. Likewise, it's very difficult to be socially aware if you are not self-aware. And that's because it's very difficult to be present for others if you are too caught up at the mercy, if you will, of your own emotions. It's then a combination of that self-management and social awareness that really informs how well you manage relationships with others. It's those quadrants that really provide the direction, energy, and restraint that allow you to manage and motivate others. But it's the relationship management, it's at that level that people actually see how well you're doing, that they actually see the results associated with your performance. So the emotional and social competency inventory basically assess competencies that fall into all of those quadrants, in addition those two cognitive competencies that I mentioned earlier. It's at this point that I'm going to hand it off again to Vanessa and ask her to share some insights in regards to her use of the ESCI-U.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone, again. This is a tool that I really have come to love. I'm still learning about it, learning more and more every time I use it, coming up with new ideas for ways to use it in the classroom. I started off using it only for my MBAs, but in the last couple of years I've been using it at the undergraduate level as well, because one of the dilemmas that I face as a professor of organizational behavior is that we don't have very many required courses that teach students soft skills. So I always feel like it's really my responsibility, the buck stops here, that I really need to do more than do a couple of readings on soft skills, but instead, really get them thinking about it, applying it to their life, creating a terminology that's useful for them to remember. So anyway, I started using this survey, and what I primarily use it for is thinking about developing their emotional intelligence competencies. So I actually use the multi-rater one rather than the self-assessment, because it's really nice for the students to be able to compare, how they rate themselves with how others rate them. At the MBA level, I think it's a little more reliable because the MBAs tend to have jobs, so that the people who are rating them tend to be coworkers, bosses, things like that. I always warn them that if they send it to their mother, that their mother's going to, give them all high scores. And so to be careful about sending it to, their best friends and their mothers. But for the most part, both the MBAs and the undergraduates end up sending it to people who provide them with useful ratings. And there's no limit to the number of people they can ask, so I require them to have at least 5 people fill it out. It's a very, very easy system. They just put in the email addresses and it's sent right out. So we get a report back that does a couple of things. First of all, it allows us to really use this language throughout the rest of the course. So we have the competencies, words like empathy or self-awareness that help me to emphasize those concepts over and over. We look at where they've, currently, what's their current level on each of these, what are their current strengths, what are their weaknesses. I have them do some goal setting. So I have them come up with 3 things, 3 competencies that they want to target, and I have them sit in their teams and have their team members come up with ways that they'll help support the development of those. So, for example, this semester I've got some people working on empathy. People score a lot lower on empathy than they usually think they're going to. And so the team members are going to give them feedback on how empathetic they seem to be coming, interacting with, or how much empathy they're demonstrating in the team, and so that works really well. The other thing I do, and I do this, of course, for the MBAs, and not necessarily unless I have time for the undergraduates, is I do some mock interviews with them because I want to show them how useful this tool is when they actually go out and interview for jobs. So just last Thursday in my MBA class, after the students had developed their goals and were working on their goals, on which competencies they wanted to develop, I brought them up to the front of the class, and I had one volunteer sit across from me, and I said, okay, so tell me about a time when you had to work in a team, and, when you were, what was your role in that team? And I had him pull out the inventory, and I had him look at the examples and the wording and the kind of words he could use to emphasize the kinds of skills that he really does display. And just the terminology and the words really helped his interview become much more specific and helped him to think about what he was going to say in the interview much more fully. And then I asked him about his weaknesses, and he had marked on what he was going to work on. And I said, well, how are you going to work on those weaknesses? And, he was able to define very, very specifically what he was going to do about how he was going to increase his ability to influence others. Influence is one of the competencies on the model. And so I found that it's really useful for helping them practice mock interviews so that they're not just going into an interview and saying, my weakness is that I work too hard. I don't make enough personal time. So instead, they can say, well, one of my weaknesses is that I'm not as influential as I want to be, and this is what I'm doing to try to improve that. Lastly, my school loves the fact that I've been using this because we've now had pressure under new accreditation rules to actually show that we're, measuring what students are learning, and that we're tying what we teach in the classroom to, the needs of the students. So I've been able to show the results to the committees in the school that are working on these things. Luckily, I'm not on one of those committees. I'm on other committees, as you can imagine, but not that one. And I show them, where the students currently stand on all these competencies, and they help us figure out how to design courses or what needs to be put into certain courses in order to help the students develop these skills and these competencies. But more importantly for them, we can measure. So for the MBAs now, we've been measuring them when they enter the program, which is my class the first semester, and then we measure them again at the end of the program, so we can actually see which of the competencies we're helping the students build throughout the time that they're in the program. And what I like about that is that then it becomes not only me focusing on the development of these soft skills, it's other faculty thinking about it as well. And we have actually demonstrated that we're increasing these competencies in the students. And just one more thing, the other thing I like about this instrument is that it's a really validated instrument, so I feel really comfortable using it in the classroom. There's been a lot of research behind it. All these behaviors are tied to success for managers. And so rather than using a tool that I'm not so sure is truly well-studied, this one I know it's well-studied, and so it just adds a level of confidence for me. So again, if you have any questions at the end of the webinar, I'm happy to answer them. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. So with that, I'm just going to briefly review our survey pricing and options for the LSI and ESCI-U, and then we'll get to the questions portion. And just a reminder, if you have any questions for Vanessa or Ginny, just type them in to the chat function on the bottom left-hand side, and we'll be reading those out to them at that point. And so I will just take you through pricing now. So for the LSI, as you're aware by now, we do have two versions available. There's the 3.1 and the 4.0. So the version 3.1 is available as a paper-based self-scored tool or as an online assessment, while the 4.0 is only available online. And I don't believe there are moves to make it a paper-based, but that might be something for the future that's still being discussed. And just to let you know, we do offer a 20% educational discount on the learning style inventories and the companion materials as well. So if you have any questions about that, please let us know. Just to touch on it quickly, the LSI 3.1 and 4.0 online, they are set up through our self-service site. So that would mean we would set you up with a self-service account where you would be the holder and you'd be able to add participants to take the assessment. And you'd also have access to view reports, create assessments, monitor participant status if you wanted to do so. And you could also give your students access to their own results as well if you wish to do so. So just let me know if you have any questions about that, either now or offline. And if you want any sample reports, I will send those over to you. And with the ESCI-U, it can also be purchased in a number of ways, either as paper-based or online. Online, we do have a self-assessment or a multi-rater assessment. And paper-based, you can have a self-scored paper-based assessment for $150 for 10 workbooks and 10 assessments. And then if you wanted to make the paper-based one a multi-rater assessment, you can buy the rater assessment booklets for $50 per participant, per book, 10 booklets. And so we recommend that each participant have at least 5 raters. So we also have sample reports of these if you'd like to see them and the related materials that are listed here. And just as an aside, we recently received word that Harvard Business School will be doing a case study on the ESCI-U for us. So if you would like a copy of this study, just let us know and we'll send that to you once it's ready. And we're really excited about that. And we are also running an ESCI-U promotion through the end of September for 10% off the ESCI-U paper-based version. So we'll be sending that promotion out later today to you in case you're interested, and that will have our contact details as well. And one thing before we jump into the questions would be a quick poll where we just want to know what products you'd like more information on. So if you can just take a second to fill that out, someone in our Boston office will then be getting in touch with you to get you the information that you're looking for. So if you just want to take a second for that, that'd be great. Okay, so while that's still being filled out, we're just going to skip on to the questions. We've gotten some really great questions from you during the webinar, so we're just going to jump right in. And the first one is for Ginny, and it's, do self-descriptive inventories like the LSI have any validity, and can you talk to that at all?
Sure. I know David's been asked that many times. Self-assessments in general are always questionable, if you will, in terms of results, because basically they're reflecting what you think you're doing or what you think other people may want you to be doing or what you think the best answer is or whatever. But with the learning style inventory, there truly is, and I know most people will say whenever they give a questionnaire, there's no right or wrong answer, but with the learning style inventory, there truly is no right or wrong answer. It's not as if one style is more desirable than the other. So there'd be no need for someone to misrepresent themselves in completing the survey to try to make their results be one style over another. So it is valid. People do tend to respond to it just the way they're supposed to, simply rank ordering in terms of preference, the 4 potential answers to each of the items. So it is valid. And I know that David's technical information that he provides on the tool, and we can forward that to folks as well, speaks to specifically what those validity and reliability measures are.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And we have one more, and then I think we'll probably have to jump off before we've taken up too much of your time. And can you just explain a little bit more about the outcome assessments? Obviously, Vanessa was talking to that earlier in the end of her speech about the ESCI-U, but those times 1 times 2 studies, and do you have any insight into that?
Well, we know from most of our clients across the board, both corporate and education, that they tend to get most value out of an assessment when they actually have some type of development opportunity followed up with a time 2 assessment. So they're able to judge how successful or not they were with the development opportunity provided. I would think that's especially important in schools, and Vanessa, I'd ask for you to chime in on this as well, to know that what you're doing is having an impact and can be seen in the scores that you see time 1 to time 2.
Chime in and say that we looked at it after a year with the MBAs twice now, and both times that they've improved, not in all of the competencies, but in a number of them. It's been really useful for our accreditation reports.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, it looks like that is all the time we have for today, so we don't want to keep you through the rest of your lunch. So thank you so much to everyone for coming, and we hope this webinar has been informative and enjoyable for you. And a special thank you to Vanessa. Thank you so much for
Vanessa.
jumping on the line with us here and helping us out.